Good morning and welcome to this beginner's guide to AI for comms staff on the Hill. My name is Aubrey Wilson and I am Director of Government Innovation at the POPVOX Foundation. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we work to support the Hill in pursuing innovative solutions, especially with an emphasis on technology and building bridges across silos so that government works better. This is why we are super excited that you'll be taking some time with us this morning to learn about AI. As a prior Hill staffer on a team of a lot of prior Hill staffers, we think that AI is a tool that can help build Congress's capacity massively, as well as save you time and even make you have some extra fun and boost your creativity during a very, very long session week, as you guys have been experiencing for the last 10 weeks. Finally, recess, happy recess. And like I said, I'm so glad that you're taking the time during it to potentially learn a new tool that you guys can play around with. Today, we are super excited to host this event with our friends from the R Street Institute. Shoshana, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you all for having me. And it's hardly a co-host. Aubrey did everything. It's very kind of her to say that, though. I run our digital media at the R Street Institute, and I'm also a policy fellow on tech and other regulatory policy. So this kind of combines a lot of my interests from AI regulation and other tech regulation to just using AI and using automation in my daily life for work.
Perfect. And say, yeah, and even though I may have pulled stuff together for the Zoom, Shoshana is AI expert. And so later on when we get to the panel, definitely make sure to pay attention to how she's been able to automate so much on the comms front. She truly is a dream of how comms could work on the Hill. And so honestly, Shoshana, I can't imagine doing this panel without you. So thank you so much for being here. So let's do a quick overview of what the kind of next hour or so is going to look like. So I'm going to start with a quick background on AI just to set the stage. Then we're going to do a quick tour of the House's internal policies on AI use to ensure that you know where the guardrails are and share a couple of the institutions kind of set best practices. If you're on the Senate side, there currently isn't an institutional guidance for AI use. And so today we're going to go over the House one, but we're also going to talk about how on the Senate side, you can kind of approach it like how you can talk about it with your boss to make sure that you know where kind of the appropriate use of tools are for your office and kind of how to navigate that to avoid any pitfalls. I'm going to then pass it off to a group discussion with Shoshana and Ian about all the ways that AI can be used in comms, both on and off the Hill, and to give you guys some creative examples of ways that it's already being used, like I said, by industries in downtown. And then we're going to wrap up with Q&A and even maybe get you guys out a little bit early for your lunch break. Just to note that this event is being recorded. And so if you do have any questions, please feel free to submit them over the chat. And if you would like to submit them anonymously, just make sure note of that in the chat. And you can send your questions to one of the panelists directly too, if that makes you feel most comfortable. So with that, let's jump into a quick background on AI. So what is AI? I think that all of us at this point have read enough news articles or heard enough about it that all of us have at least a base understanding. The most important thing to remember is that AI has actually been around in some way, shape, or form for a really long time. From the text prediction on your cell phones to the recommendations that Netflix gives you for the next show you want to binge, even to how Google pulls up results for your search. It's been around for a while, but where things really started to get wild was a year ago, a little bit over that actually, when a company called OpenAI, which I'm sure we've all heard of, announced a launch of their large language model, or LLM, called ChatGPT. The reason why this and subsequent competitors on the market have been such a game changer is that it's because they generate new text to answer questions, pulling from a huge amount and variety of sources. Now, generative AI or GenAI technology has adapted far beyond just text generation, as I'm sure, especially in the communications world, you guys have all heard of or seen AI generated image, pictures, videos, sound clips, and more. But today, we're just going to focus on what Congress is allowed to use and put an extra emphasis on the fact that, yeah, those tools are out there. But for kind of this beginner guide for comms using AI on the Hill, we're definitely going to focus on ChatGPT specifically, since generative text is kind of more of the limit right now of what the Hill has at least focused on approving for use. And so for Congress, the House is actually the farthest along in establishing an AI use case policy. Like I said at the beginning, if you're in the Senate, your chamber hasn't yet put out any official guidance. So technically, no tools are authorized or unauthorized. But as a result, we would definitely recommend checking with your team, senior staff, and leadership to see if compliance with the House guidance is a safe place to start for now. Usually there is some overlap or at least some mirrored image of guidance between the two chambers. And so being able to reference where the House is something that will probably make your staff feel a little bit more comfortable about appropriate and safe use of the tool right now in the chamber until the Senate puts out some official guidance from the Secretary of Senate or Senate Sergeant Arms. Now, if you use ChatGPT in the House, it's definitely important to know that the House Information Resources, or HIR, which is within the Office of the CAO, has limited AI use to ChatGPT 4+, which is the paid subscription version. That's the only generative AI tool, full stop, allowed for use in the House of Representatives. A subscription is $20 a month. And if your team decides to utilize this tool to experiment with or to use to kind of start adapting it a little bit to workflows, it's important to remember that since it is an approved tool, it might be able to be a subscription that's covered by a member's MRA. And so it's definitely worth something to talk to your boss about. An additional thing to bring up would be whether or not your office would like to get an office-wide subscription with one kind of shared account and password, or if they would like there to be separate subscriptions and sign-ins for different staff instead of just having the one license. And so that's definitely something to talk to your chief about. Now, when you use ChatGPT 4 on official House or Senate devices, but specifically the House, because once again, it's kind of where it's been approved so far, all of the privacy settings have to be turned on. Most importantly, the setting that limits the model's access to your chat history. And so that's one thing that from the very beginning, you just go to your settings and you have to turn that on. One thing that you'll notice is that ChatGPT 4, as new versions of the tool come out, there's a bunch of really amazing plugins. And so, for example, there's live searching the internet with Bing. There's a PDF reader plugin as well, along with a couple others. As soon as you put in the privacy settings that the House requires, those plugins don't become accessible anymore. So that's one limiting factor, but it is one thing that the House has emphasized, that even though it does kind of limit those uses, it's still super important for security that you guys use those privacy settings. So just know where those limitations are and realize that when you do turn on the privacy setting to not have the model access your chat history, that those plugins will go away. A couple other guide rails or guidelines that the House has kind of put on the use of the tool as well is that the use of ChatGPT can only be authorized for research and evaluation tasks, and it can only be used to help offices experiment with how an LLM can be aided in workflows, but you're not allowed to fully integrate it as a necessary tool in a workflow. So the House here is definitely making sure that you understand that although right now it is approved to use ChatGPT, as new versions of it come out and things might change from a cybersecurity standpoint, at any point, the tool can become unauthorized. And so although it is fun to play with and to experiment with and to use for brainstorming, don't build it into anything that you're going to become 100% reliable on it, because at some point it might become unauthorized. So for those, oh, actually one more thing. So before we go on to a quick demo, I did want to share for our Senate friends on the call, and then also for anyone else who has a hard time to find things on HouseNet, which we all do. The House and Senate, well, the House's guidance and the future Senate guidance, it's really hard to access publicly. And so at POPVOX Foundation, we took all of the guidance that's currently relevant and put it onto one easy to access web page. And so I'm going to drop that into the chat. And so as you guys continue to monitor, I'm going to drop it in the chat, maybe. Actually, we will follow up. I'm not seeing a chat in here. So we did disable chat because it's a webinar. So instead, we will follow up with you via email with that link, and then with another link about how in your offices you can set up an internal AI use guidance policy as well. And so we'll follow up with that, but we have made it so that the guidance both for House and Senate is publicly available, and we'll update it over time. So you guys do have kind of a one-stop shop to look at that guidance and know what's allowed and what isn't. And so with that, actually, I'm going to do a quick share screen. So a lot of you guys have obviously heard of ChatGPT, but unless you have actually decided to pay for a subscription, you might not have actually, where did I go? Might have not actually been able to play with it yet. And so I wanted to just take a quick opportunity and pull it up to show you guys what it looks like if you haven't had the chance. And so this is what ChatGPT 4 looks like. This is the paid version. So this is what you would experience. And I wanted to just put in a sample example of what you guys could use it for. So I'm just going to ask the tool itself, how can you be used to help communication staffers on the Hill? And so simple question. And so this is literally how easy it is to use it. Like I said, if you haven't played around with it already. So I just asked it, how would you be used best to help communication staffers on the Hill? In the case of a couple of seconds, but it's going to keep throwing out examples for us. This is one of my favorite things to do with ChatGPT 2 is that if I'm working on a project, even if I can't think of how to utilize the tool for a project, I'll ask it like, hey, I'm working on this type of project. What are some ways that you might be able to help me with this? It really helps kind of start that creative process and brainstorming. It helps a lot with boosting creativity and making you realize kind of all of the different ways that these LLMs can be utilized, which is really, really fun. And the more that you play around with it, the more you'll see in your workflows the opportunities to use it. And so as you can see, it's spitting out a lot here. So drafting and editing content, especially for rough drafts in the house, is very helpful to just kind of start the writer's block and get past it just by helping it kind of come up with a couple ideas of how a topic can be approached. Research support, responses to constituents, social media analysis, helping you build out FAQs or information sheets, helping with training, doing crisis communication. One of the ones here, let me put in another example. Let's say since you guys have just gotten into recess finally after so many weeks of session, I'm sure with going into the holiday season that some streamlined workflows would probably be helpful. So let's say, can you help me build out a communications strategy for the week? Giving in 8 weeks. And so once again, after kind of being burnt out, when you guys are kind of up against not being creative, this is one way that it can kind of help brainstorm what your guys' content can be like over the next couple of weeks, especially when your mind and heart are kind of focused more on holiday than having to come up with tweets or X's or whatever they're called now. And so as you can see, it gives you a ton of examples, super quick. You're able to, pick on one, for example, and say, okay, for content, you told me to focus on local and holiday events and celebrations and traditions. What are some of the ways that I can find those? They can give you some examples. So once again, you can see how fast it is. But as we move into our panel discussion, I wanted to just show you what the tool looks like, so you guys can start getting an idea for kind of what we're talking about and everything that's possible. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Shoshana and Ian. Now, we've already met Shoshana. So Ian, I'm going to kick it off to you for an intro and also for you to just kind of kick off the discussion.
Well, thank you. My name's Ian Spencer. I'm a partner and CTO at RedEdge. We're a digital agency based in Arlington. We build websites, create videos, and run digital campaigns for clients, mostly think tanks, also some trade associations, DC-ish kind of groups. Our company is very pro AI, and we're trying to find opportunities to integrate generative AI into kind of lots of different processes that we have. Just because it seems to be such a boost for productivity for us when used the right way. But also because we have so many clients in the trade association space, we're also very conscious of pitfalls and risk to our clients. So that's something we're always extremely conscious of. And it's sort of a razor's edge sometime in terms of how much you want to use something that's really exciting versus the potential risks it can bring. So it's something we've thought quite a bit about over here. We've done quite a bit, I guess, helping with brainstorming is really kind of the biggest thing that we use it for. We use ChatGPT for. It's something where, I think a lot of folks maybe think of it as, oh, well, I can just use ChatGPT to send an email or something like that. And in our experience, you very much don't want to do that. Even if it got it completely right, it's something that it's good for kind of early brainstorming for ideas, and it will help kind of create a basis for talking through a lot of different things. So just one example off the top of my head. Since I knew we were going to do this panel, I asked ChatGPT to create 5 names for a bill which would fund AI development at universities, and each with a clever acronym. Again, Congress seems to love coming up with bills with lengthy acronyms that sort of sometimes work, maybe sometimes don't fully work. It came up with 10. I'd say about 8 of them were cheesy to the point of being embarrassing to share. 2 of them were pretty good. The one I liked the best was the BRAIN bill, BRAIN bill, building research in AI networks. And so just using as something where, hey, we want to just come up with a whole plethora of ideas, and we're not expecting ChatGPT to come up with the finished product, but to come up with something that we can then brainstorm off of. It's something we do a lot of, and it's just so easy and clear.
Well, and to kind of piggyback off that too, that's such a great example, because I know that one of the big things that we've kind of been talking about internally, at least POPVOX, is that AI, like you were saying, like it can help draft initial things, but it's always worth a double or triple read of whatever it drafts. It's kind of like a junior, very entry level research assistant, where like sometimes it makes sense, but sometimes it makes really weird errors. And so it definitely saves time, the same way that assigning something to an intern does, especially like a well-trained intern, which is kind of how ChatGPT is. But it's like definitely something where every now and then you'll read something, you'll be like, where did you get this from? And so like you were saying too, with the examples, like, 2 of maybe the 10 bill names are going to be good, but it is helpful to have the brainstorming kind of done for you on the back end. I know another thing that we have also laughed at was sometimes we'll write something and it'll just come off as really dry, and we'll put it into ChatGPT and be like, can you just make this funny? Like, can you start it out with a joke, or can you somehow like make it kind of have more levity? And it's amazing. Like the jokes that it comes up with are sometimes really, really funny. And so that's another good thing that makes something like content that's really dry. It can kind of spice it up a little bit, but once again, sometimes they're pretty bad jokes. But it's Congress. We're used to bad jokes. So
it is a dad joke machine. It is like if it was expressly built for dad jokes, where you're connecting 2 different things and you're kind of doing a lame but funny-ish joke combining the 2 things. It's incredible, absolutely incredible. Now, something more than that, I don't know, but at least for that, absolutely. And your point about checking everything, that's really key. We sort of have an informal rule: never copy and paste directly out of it. Almost certainly there's going to be an error, or either just a major logic error or something like that, especially if it's more than a paragraph of text. So again, we like it as a kernel, or as like a something for testing, or for checking the work that we've done, as opposed to something that's actually kind of doing the hard work in the middle. It's great at coming up with tweets and headlines, again, kind of connecting 2 different ideas. So for example, you have the BRAIN bill or something like that, and it's the week of Thanksgiving. You can tell it, hey, come up with 10 tweets which promote people talking about the BRAIN bill over Thanksgiving dinner. And it's going to come up with a bunch of corny puns about, example, tomorrow's Thanksgiving, and while you're passing the gravy, don't forget to pass along the news about the BRAIN bill. It's like cranberry sauce for college campuses, a little sweet, a little tangy, and totally necessary for research. I mean, lame, but again, you're getting an initial idea that you can then frankly make good, right?
Yeah, one thing I'll add in there too is that like I when ChatGPT first came out, I was like, because I love occupational licensing reform. I was wondering if I could come up with the Sloth Act for licensing reform, and it gave me a really great acronym, and it gave me a couple of versions of them. Years back, Senator Hatch had this great press release about marijuana policy, and it was like full of puns. But ChatGPT could probably do that. Like, hey, edit this press release, but just fill it with puns. Editing is something that I think is really useful for comm staff in particular too, because doing digital media at different organizations, I just know how rapid responsey it gets sometimes, and how like no matter how many times you check for errors, there's going to be errors. I've had really, really good luck with ChatGPT just editing stuff. I'll copy and paste into there and say, find me the errors, or it'll even give me ideas of how to better word stuff. I also use Zapier as a tool a lot. I'm a really big evangelist for it because it's an incredible tool that can automate full processes. I actually have something really nuts that every time editorial sends us a final blog post or policy paper, it starts and then takes all the information from it and puts it into a post that's 95% perfectly filled out, including like custom fields. This has been like years of labor into this, but now the final step, instead of just adding it to my to-do list to promote, it puts tweets there too. And I'd say like 50% of the time, those tweets are perfect. They're right out of the content, good quotes or good pieces of information. But every now and then, and I haven't been able to figure this out, but when it does it for our podcasts, which are exactly the same kind of post type as anything else, it'll send me them with quotes from like Gandhi or like MLK. I like don't understand what it thinks I'm asking it, but every other time it knows what I'm asking and gives me some version of it. But here it's like MLK or whatever, and it's really funny. So you always do want to check it, like that lawyer in New York who got in trouble for citing fake cases. And even if you give it clear instructions, sometimes it goes a little YOLO. I've been having it do Blue Book sites for one of my papers yesterday, like 60 freaking Blue Book sites. And most of them were really good, but then a couple of them it stopped doing it in the correct format. So I'd be like, hey, is this the correct Blue Book format? It's like, whoops, sorry, nope. So it's kind of like a real person in that way, where like people get lazy and it might like go off. So you always really, really want to double check it. And even if you give it instructions, sometimes it forgets those instructions over the course of the conversation. So just keep an eye out for that stuff. But it is super useful, drafting, editing, coming up with ideas. The acronyms I really love, because I feel like that's a really big need in Congress. You always want to have those cute acronyms. And maybe you don't love what it lands on, but like maybe it hits it right and you're like, man, this is some really good marketing. I was also testing it earlier today because I know that a lot of press releases, and this can go between like comms and legislative staff, but you want to have quotes from scholars like R Street scholars, and you might want to know who's working on what. Like, are there liberal leaning scholars working on this issue, or conservative leaning scholars working on this issue who'd be on our side? And it was pretty good in IDing R Street's policy stances on different issues, though it does have a bit of a recency bias where like we had this post recently that was a little bit off topic for stuff we've done, and the answer was almost all glued to that, which isn't wrong. It's just not as maybe broad as it might have otherwise been. But all of this is super useful, and if you're able to, I would highly recommend Zapier and playing around with it. You can go from like everything from every time this happens, add it to a spreadsheet, to like a 50-step automation like I have for website posting and adding to my to-do list. Like, you build over time, and ChatGPT is right in there. The final thing that I think I really love this for, and I think there could be real congressional use for all different kinds of staff, is chatbots. It lets you build a chatbot. ChatGPT is kind of in it. You don't need to connect it to your own, but we have an R Street internal chatbot that tells people information. It's wrong like maybe 20% of the time, but the other 80%, it lets people find information really easily using AI on a spreadsheet, which is a really cool kind of thing. So I feel like there's a lot of different uses for you guys, probably some we're not thinking of too, that you should totally let us know if there's like, hey, could it be used for this, or have you used it for this? We're here for that. But it's super, super useful, and if you haven't touched it, you totally should.
To that point about it being wrong, 20% sounds about right to me, and to my experience. But the great thing is you can ask it for sources. So almost anytime I'm asking it for something that's authoritative, as opposed to, a silly like compositional creative thing, I say, please include sources. And if it doesn't include a source for the part that I'm asking about in the conversation, you can follow up and say, you said that this happens 20% of the time. Can you give me your sources for that? And almost always it will then give you the sources. You can then see, are those sources garbage? Are those sources good? Because it's a mix of things. ChatGPT is basically the most incredible autocomplete you could ever imagine. But it also means it's based off of this massive corpus of data, vast majority of which is good, but some of which is wrong, and some of which is in conflict, and some of which disagrees. earlier today, not work related. I asked, what's the right age for a baby to sleep by itself? Because I have a 5-month-old. And it gave 3 different answers from 3 different sources. So it's helpful. It correctly didn't give me an authoritative answer because there is no authoritative answer to that. But it gave me 3 different kind of interpretations of it, each of which I could kind of go and check myself. I think that sort of chat component of it, it's important to remember that it is chat. It isn't just answer a question. So, and with Aubrey's example earlier, where I gave that awesome comps plan, her next question could have been something like, this is great, but actually we also want to acknowledge this. We also want to acknowledge Boxing Day, and we need a special Boxing Day event. Can you please incorporate that and include some tweets that are relevant to that? And it's context sensitive to that earlier part of the chat. As Shoshana said, it doesn't always remember every bit of your chat, but it tends to remember most of it. And it's certainly better than starting a new separate chat, just so it has more context.
I also will just add in, so when I was on the Hill, I was a legislative correspondent for a time, a legislative assistant for a time, and then I went and worked on a committee. And one of the biggest time sucks and hardest points of communication between the legislative shop and the communication shop was that the legislative shop was seeing all these reports. It was seeing huge transcripts from hearings. There was so much information that then almost had to be translated for comms use, because you're working with tweets, you're working with really short press releases, you're working with trying to get things to sound really, really interesting after coming out of a super long congressional report. Can both of you guys talk about how you have used kind of AI from like a comms perspective to help translate that heavy kind of dense policy or even like client stuff into like something that's more creative with the use of AI?
Yeah, so on my end, it's a lot of tweets. I actually use it on a daily basis, and sometimes it like does the tweets for a post so poorly where I'm like, okay, I'm scrapping. But usually it's pretty good, and it kind of gets better than, I'm staring at this content all the time. So sometimes my brain's like sucked into it and I can't think outside myself. So then it comes in with better tweets than honestly I would have written for the most part. And having that's really helpful. Though sometimes it fills up the whole text box with tweet, and you want to link in there and maybe tags and stuff. So I've set a character limit in the automation that like, okay, it has to be within this. And it's funny because it always returns like a slightly different format. Sometimes at the end, it says in parentheses, tweetable. And I'm like, oh, this is helpful. Or it'll say how many characters or whatever. Another really funny thing that I actually used it for, and this I feel like can go across lots of areas too, is so on the side, as one does, I'm an associate fellow for the Sloth Institute, and I've put together a couple of government databases for them on sloth treatment in the US. If anyone's interested, let me know. And also sloth imports and exports after my first successful FOIA. And someone had recommended just uploading that database of both of them into ChatGPT and having it see what the most interesting or unique or special data in there, any trends in there. And it's really good at finding trends. Sometimes you have to give it a few limits if there's like a lot of columns. But overall, it's really helpful. And you might be using that for like feedback on comms. Like maybe you track what people are saying, or maybe you download all of the tweets and interactions and you want to see what does best. I've done that a lot at other organizations, and it took forever because I'm like, okay, what about this word? What about this word? And there were just endless rows and endless columns of me testing how well different things performed. But here you could probably upload all of the tweets from your member and say, okay, what's performing best, or what's getting the most retweets versus likes or whatever. And I feel like there's just so much potential there, especially if you use data in your role. And even from a comms perspective, there's just so many ways to change formats. Like, hey, write tweets from this press release, or here's a tweet thread my member did, write a press release from that. Like it can go both ways.
Summarizing complex things is frankly what it might be best at. Taking a bill or taking a clause from like the US code or from a contract or something like that and say, explain this to me like I'm not a lawyer, because I'm not. Now again, it doesn't replace having an actual lawyer review the language, but for a quick kind of back of the envelope, what does this mean? Help me parse this out really quickly. It is incredibly helpful. So you talk about that relationship between the policy shop and the comms shop. If the policy shop's super busy and there's something kind of unrelated but tangential, you just want, okay, I want to make sure I understand that a bit. Just paste the whole thing in there and say, give it a good summary, and then you can ask it specific questions about what you just pasted in. Like, how does this affect this group? Or blah, 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 blah. And it will, again, with let's call it 75% confidence, give you good answers on that. And so if there's something where you want that sort of quick, just validate your reading of something to see if that sounds correct, it'll do it. Doesn't replace a lawyer, but it's better than trying to interpret it yourself sometimes.
Well, I can, well, yeah, and I can imagine that being super helpful on the Hill, and especially for communication staffers who work for members' personal office, because depending on the huge array of subcommittees and committees your members on, in addition to whatever's coming up on the floor, like enable to, or to be able to, as a comms staffer, to be really engaged on all of those various topics that might come up during a session week, you kind of have to get smart on an issue really fast to understand how it could play like in your district or to your audience. And so, like, you know, the ability, if something comes up that you can find a public access CRS report to that's publicly available, where you can take that CRS report or that GAO report or some, private, sponsored report or whatever, and stick it in ChatGPT and be like, I just need to have a quick background on, this topic. Can you just help get me up to speed? I can imagine that being something that would save hours for comm staff, especially during a busy week, or it wouldn't even save hours. I feel like right now you guys don't even have the time to do that. And so it would just, I think, probably give you guys a lot more confidence in that as well. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, I actually want to add in there too. I bet you could like search polling. Like if you're doing, even if your issue's popular or if it's unpopular, search how are there public opinion polls on like whatever issue? Are there polls based in like Tennessee, stuff like that, where you could really narrow it down and figure out how to message. And a lot of times, I mean, we're talking to comm staffers, so they know, but like messaging is everything. It's how you talk about stuff, because an idea can sound really awful or really great depending on how you talk about it and how, it affects different people. And one thing I think that we're all kind of getting at too, and I know a lot of people have said it, but like this isn't replacing comm staff. Like this is adding capacity, because like, everyone in Congress is really busy, and I think understaffed, and I think also a little underpaid. There's a couple of things going on there, but along with that, like there's nothing as useful as having like an assistant and or intern that you can ping to be like, okay, research this for me, and maybe they're wrong, but like you have a starting point and kind of a point to go from. Because like every time I talk to congressional staff, they're just busy up to their eyeballs, and sometimes stuff that we've been working on together will like just go away because they're so busy with other stuff. So it is a really cool way to add capacity, and maybe also add the ability to have a little bit more breathing time in their days and stuff like that. So I think, one day AI could maybe replace people, but even in that way, it's going to add capacity because Congress needs more help.
Amen.
That was one of your point, Shoshana. It's a great one, and it's something that people in our organization have had concerns about, like, or say, are we looking for AI to replace people? And absolutely not. Not an original thought. I'm sorry, I don't know the original source for this, but there's a saying: AI won't replace humans, but humans with AI will replace humans without AI at some companies. And I do think that's the case, right? People who know how to leverage these tools really do have a major leg up, and efficiency and productivity leg up over those who don't. And that's, I think, only going to get wider as the tools get more powerful.
Well, and one thing that's just amazing from a congressional capacity standpoint, to exactly your point, Ian, is like the idea that if you have a staffer who's using AI, they can streamline some of the more mundane things that they used to spend a lot of time on, so that they can focus their time where it's needed the most. And so whether that's like, even though your tweets will be easier to draft, you will have more time to actually get those talking points perfect for your member's floor speech, or you'll be able to prep your member better, versus spending, all of that time instead of just prepping yourself to prep the member better. And so I think you're absolutely right. Like, it's not there to replace any staff. It's just there to make them way more effective at their jobs, potentially across, not only the Hill, but I mean, like you guys are explaining, like this is something that's being used all over DC. It's being used all across industries. So that degree too, like the Hill, has the ability to be outcompeted if everyone else is using these tools and Congress isn't. That's a huge disadvantage to try to keep up for congressional staff.
And burnout's a really big factor here. One reason I put so many hours into that one really big automation that posts to the website is we post thousands of things a year, and that like burns out my employees super hard. And she's amazing, and I don't want to burn her out. So this helps stop burnout from repetitive tasks. Or even like, I know so many times I've just sat like staring like looking over and over, editing something, stuff that Word can't quite get. Sometimes, Word messes up just like everything. But when I have my personal blog, before I post it, I just put it into ChatGPT quick to like edit it and make sure there's no like glaring errors, or if there's anything I'm saying really poorly. And that's a really, really big help. I think editing is one of the really superior functions, but there's so many burnout moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, I've read this 50 times and I'm like just trying to find, I know there's something in there, or oh my gosh, I do this thing constantly. Automation and AI really, really thrive with repetitive tasks. And I know that like there's a lot of repetitive tasks in Congress, understandably, but this can really help with that to stop the burnout. So when you feel like you're burning out, or you feel like you're doing something again and again, those are really good moments to think through, should I like check out what I can do through AI or automation?
Something else that we use it quite a bit for, and I know this is going to be limited in how it can be used on the Hill, especially because image generation is not currently authorized at the House or Senate. But a lot of times we'll have a bit of a kind of a communications barrier between our comms folks and our visual designers or our developers. And ChatGPT is very good at describing visuals. And so if you ask it, for example, hey, come up with a share image to go along with this post. Here's the headline. Give me some examples of imagery that can go with it, calls to action, things like that. It can generate a bunch of ideas for what goes in the image that you can then share with the designer. And instead of telling the designer, make it pop, which a designer is going to roll their eyes at you and think you're a moron, instead you're giving them a really clear picture of, okay, we're going to have the Capitol in the background, but it's going to be Art Deco style with blue text on top, or blah, 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 blah. So right, something really specific that makes their lives much easier, instead of trying to interpret something vague simply because, like me, you're not a designer, and so it's hard to express yourself in kind of a helpful way for that.
Kind of to that point, can I ask you both about prompts? So obviously ChatGPT works off of prompts. You have to write in the question that you wanted to answer. And there's kind of a science to this. I was curious if both of you could like give a couple like best practices or tips or tricks about like how you refine your prompts, how you continue, like how you ask questions to get the most out of the tool, any kind of thing that you guys have that you found has been made the tool extra effective for you.
Yeah, it's a lot of trial and error depending on what I'm doing. Sometimes it's just me reminding it over and over, like, no, blue book style, put in today's date as date last visited. Come on. Other times, like, I mean, to be honest, but I'm just making memes. I'm trying to jailbreak like the image maker a lot. I recently had SpongeBob feeding on a deer carcass, and it wouldn't let me use carcass, so I changed it to deer meat, and then it like let me through. But it's actually gotten really, really strict. Like I've been making think tanks into Pokemon, and it's cool with that. But if I try to make elected officials into Pokemon, it gives me issues. So you have to figure out these little jailbreaks. But unfortunately, it's actually getting really hard to jailbreak it, mostly for meme purposes, not exclusively. But a lot of times you just really do need to try different formats and different styles. It's interesting too, because depending on where you're using it, it's different. In our chatbot, our internal chatbot, it actually took me a while to engineer the prompt because I only get one prompt in it and it has to be perfect. So at first I was sending like endless paragraphs explaining stuff, and I'm like, no, someone wants a link. They want a link and a quick description of what the link is. So I said, okay, limit 100 characters, and then it cut off the link, which is not useful. So I'm like, okay, limit 100 characters, not including links, and then you kind of got it there. Oddly enough, it's had like sometimes it performs super well with just, I mean, it's broad, it performs pretty well overall. But what it struggles with most is really interesting when our database is just normal internal resources, logins, contact information, who to email about what, who handles what, stuff like that. But it struggles a lot if you're like, send me the list of everyone's emails. It's a link to it, but it's worried, I think, that it's sensitive information. So it struggles a bit there. And it also struggles with snack requests for our office. If you put that in, it asks you what snacks you like, and like we'll go back and forth with you. And I'm like, what? Like, so I've had to like add in some like Okay, and if I ask for snack requests, please follow the database. Like, do not like engage. Little things like that. So even where you're using it, where ChatGPT is plugged into, if you're using it for code builders or other stuff like that, it's all going to function a little bit differently. And I haven't seen any real hard and fast rules beyond like you just gotta keep playing with it and trying stuff. And if you feel like it's not getting you, start a new chat, and then it resets the rules each time, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, something I would definitely encourage folks to do is to use the custom instructions, which is under settings in the bottom left. By default, ChatGPT kind of caveats everything it says. It's like a nervous person on a first date where it's doing a lot of ums and well, you know, if you feel this way about it, like so in my custom instructions, it basically says don't add any caveats, speak directly. If you don't know the answer to something, say you don't know, list sources. Basically, it's kind of weird because in a way I'm trying to tell it talk more like a computer than you know a normal kind of nervous person. Um, just in general prompting, the more detailed prompt you can give, the better answer you're going to get out. Which is really a bit counterintuitive because we're used to thinking, especially with email, hey, don't overdo it with instruction to someone. Hey, someone's smart, they'll figure it out. You don't need to explain everything to them. The more you explain to ChatGPT, the better result you're going to get out of it. Even if it doesn't always take everything into account, it's going to be much closer to the response that you want if you've given it some really kind of fixed parameters and guidance. And so I would definitely encourage that. Um, I'd also say, you know, to Shoshana's point, we almost never use real names in it or ask it to talk about real names just because you're going to hit a safety barrier really quickly or it's going to go into this, you know, it isn't authoritative, so you don't know if you can trust a result. So, you know, in a chance where like if you're asking about it, you know, the president or something like that, we would use a fictional name for that case. So that way it doesn't hit a safety barrier wall. And that way it doesn't also bring any biases or whatever if you're using a specific name.
Yeah, and that actually is like such a good transition to like, and one more thing I wanted to make sure we covered on here was like when it's really inappropriate to use ChatGPT right now. And so like, as we kind of talked about on the Hill, the House restrictions make it so that you have to make it extra private where it can't access your chat history because like the reason being, because they don't want the information that Hill staff put into it to further train the model. Because essentially any text you put in, that can be retained and then kind of respit out and it kind of feeds in and educates the models, like, you know, continues to get smart, which is why it's continuing to get better. But by turning off those restrictions for the staff who are using it, and you know, it kind of auto introduces some guardrails that, you know, what the put in won't be taken. But that being said, I know a huge one on the Hill that's like an extra emphasis, like you were just talking about too, Ian, is like not putting in people's real names, not putting in any PII. You know, if you're going to, you know, recognize a constituent for something amazing that they did, don't actually use their name. If there's like any specifics about, you know, if it's a death that you're recognizing, like not putting in that information. But like you said, keeping it more broad. So then personalize on the back end, I think is a really, really good best practice, especially with like whistleblowers. That's another one where you do not want to put any whistleblower information into the model. And like even, you know, having it speak like in your boss's voice. I mean, that's a pretty inappropriate use to ask it to try to figure out what your boss's voice is. That is your job. That is like one of the biggest things about being comms. You know your boss super well. And so that's like where, you know, your editing would have to come in and play a role there. Is there any other like ones that really are glaring that I'm missing, Shoshana and Ian, other than like, you know, the PII and that, like you said, not really putting in, tracking people, asking it for search for things on people? Is there anything else I'm missing?
No, I think you pretty much got it all. Those were the big ones I was going to say. Like, if someone has a constituent request that you can't figure out, it's totally cool to search about their situation, just not using any of their information. Like, I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, if someone is complaining about like a local school or something, you can like, I wouldn't even mind looking up the school to be like, have there been any problems with the school or something like that, but not like has Mary Brooks complained about the school before? I feel like that would be like something that pings it a little bit too hard. And no, obviously, like social security numbers or other PII like that. I've actually been violating those rules for myself constantly. I'm just like, man, I wonder, like, do these medications interact and stuff like that? So hopefully that doesn't come back to bite me. But for work, I wouldn't do that stuff.
Well, hopefully ChatGPT is developing a love of sloths thanks to your inputs that will affect it for years to come. Uh, I just say again, you're gonna people naturally are gonna copy and paste a couple things out of it, but we really encourage people not to copy and paste directly out of unless you're very, very confident and it's something that's very benign, very neutral. At least for me, I think it's very easy to tell when something's been like paragraphs of text have been written by ChatGPT. I know our company probably gets 3 to 4 times the number of cover letters that we used to get when we're getting job applicants, which is smart. I mean, I think it's smart if folks do it, but it's also super obvious just because, again, there's a lot of semicolons and it's overwritten in a way that's you can just tell it's ChatGPT, or at least I can tell it's ChatGPT. Again, probably better to send some kind of cover letter than none, but I just think it's quite obvious. And so just being really careful about what parts are we taking out, what are we copying out, or really what are we using it for. That's why we use it just more as kernels of brainstorms, more than and as a hard tool as opposed to like the primary compositional tool.
Yeah, and I think with that too, obviously, especially on the Hill, I think that there's a lot of like it's not even misinformation, it's just a lot of like fear and ignorance about what these tools are. I mean, there's so much news out there about all the various competitor tools outside of just ChatGPT as well. And I know that they're just, even depending on what part of the country you're in. I mean, I'm from Northern Idaho. I don't think people up there have really even started experimenting with these tools at all as compared to people, in the cities on the East Coast. And so kind of to that, one of the things that I wanted to kind of highlight for our audience is that, even though the House has approved guidance, it doesn't mean that your specific office is okay with use of these tools. And so when you guys, now that you hopefully through this 101 have kind of gotten a little bit of a bug to go and play with it, when you do decide to go back to your chief of staff or your ledge director, to talk to them about whether or not you can use this in the office, I highly recommend that you encourage them to establish an actual AI internal office use policy for your specific office to make sure it's in alignment with what your member also wants. Just like how Ian was saying, I mean, like having internal office rules of being like, we don't copy paste out of this, or, to clearly put in the policy, no PII in there, no whistleblower, no casework, to have it say, it can be used for brainstorming, but maybe it can't be used for initial drafts, or maybe it can be used to help summarize documents, but it can't be used to do tweets. Like making sure that those guidelines are super clear in your office, I think will make everyone feel comfortable. I know one of my biggest concerns is that, even though Congress moves slow, the tons of interns who come in every single semester who are young and in college, who are probably starting to use these tools, that's going to be a hard adjustment for them if they have to come in and suddenly they can't use it in Congress after they've been using it in their personal lives, and they expect to be able to use these modern tools. And so even, as you guys start working with interns, like having, like I said, that internal office guidance that makes it clear to everyone who comes to work on your team, even if it's temporary, of what that, what those kind of guidelines are. I think that's a really important step in conversation for you guys to start having with your boss. At POPVOX Foundation, we actually did a blog post about like how you can kind of start those conversations and potential options, kind of like a menu of options of what those guidelines could look like. So we'll send that along afterwards as follow up to this event as well. But after kind of like, any last thoughts from Shoshana and Ian, we'd be happy to open it up to Q&A. I haven't seen anything come through yet. But if you guys do have any questions, please feel free to submit them. And otherwise, Shoshana, Ian, any last thoughts on AI for comm staff?
Yeah, no, I love this. And I really want to thank you for hosting it and for like coming up with the idea. It's so funny. We had similar ideas at similar times, except you were way further ahead, which is really funny. And I love working with PopVox. And also I love getting to work with you again because you used to work for R Street, and a line of people stole you away from us, which is unfortunate. And I'm also really grateful that Ian joined because like, well, PopVox knows everything about Congress and even puts our street to shame. They're like, you guys know so much and are so like intricately involved. Ian and Red Edge do some of the best digital work I've ever seen. Like they'll go back to like old school stuff if it's the right solution. So I always love getting ideas from them. I actually just used Ian to help me figure out how to structure regex to like take apart some information, and I'd been struggling with it for like a year, and he explained it. I'm like, oh yeah, I do it in 2 different steps, and like that solves it. But I love getting to work with people with all different kinds of expertise, like really deep in their field, and I feel like this was like the perfect panel for that.
Well, thank you. You're really kind, Shoshana. It has been great. I've really enjoyed it. I really appreciate being invited here and talking a little bit about it. One thing I'd kind of leave folks with is I use kind of ChatGPT to fill in things that I know I'm not very good at. I know I'm not very creative when it comes to coming up with puns for a tweet or something like that. And so it's sort of filling in a gap that I know that I have. Same with, explaining visuals to a designer. So, if you're pretty self-aware of the things that you think you're good at and the things you think you're maybe not quite as good at, finding where it can kind of supplement and be an additional part of your brain, I think it can be just incredibly helpful there. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit of our experience.
Well, thank you guys both so much for joining us. And honestly, too, like for the audience, I've loved using ChatGPT for work, but I've also loved using it in my personal life. It is fun to play around with, and the more you play around with it, I think the more you really understand what its capabilities are to have it apply back to work life as well. And so I hope that over Thanksgiving break, after being burned out with 10 weeks of session, if your relatives keep going back to the topic of politics over the dinner table, use ChatGPT to come up with some other conversation prompts to get them away from it, because you guys need the break. And so thank you for letting this conversation be part of your session break during recess prior to Thanksgiving. Thanks for taking the time today. We hope that it provided some kind of initial information about these tools. If you guys have any questions and any feedback about this event, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you again to our panelists, Shoshana and Ian, for joining. You guys have been amazing. And I hope that everyone enjoys a wonderful lunch. Thank you.